Hi, I'm Valena. At my brother's anniversary, they sat me in the corner, far from the toasts, far from the family. They handed me a drink I never asked for, and smiled like nothing was wrong. But when a woman stopped me near the hallway and whispered, "Your stepmother put something in your glass," I didn't panic. I just swapped it. 15 minutes later, the room exploded, and that's when I knew this wasn't neglect. It was elimination. Before we dive in, what time are you listening and where from? Drop a comment. I want to know who's with me, because this story, it gets darker. The parking lot gleamed with polished chrome and unfamiliar license plates. I slowed my steps as I walked past Bentleys and Porsches, every car a mirror to a life I was never part of. Clay's 10-year anniversary celebration had clearly turned into a full-blown family gala. Every cousin, every business associate, every person who had ever once toasted a glass in our father's house was here. I tightened the strap of my small clutch, trying to look like I belonged. The heels I wore were pinching, but that wasn't what made it hard to walk. It was the way the valets looked at me, like I had parked in the wrong lot, walked through the wrong door. One of them approached, squinting slightly. "Ma'am, staff should enter through the catering entrance." I blinked. "I'm not with staff." His face didn't change. I stepped past him without another word. Just inside the marble foyer of the Austin Country Club, Clarice appeared, flawless as always in her pearl gray dress, hair in a tight updo that somehow made her look younger and more unbothered. She didn't stop walking. Just a glance, a sideways swipe of her words. "Just sit where we placed you, Valena. Don't cause a scene today." And she was gone. I hadn't seen my father yet, nor Clay. But I knew this was the tone for the evening, dismissive, polished, and cruel without ever raising a voice. The ballroom glittered with chandeliers and floating candlelight. I scanned the tables. The main family table was surrounded, laughter, hands touching, stories overlapping. My name wasn't there. I walked the perimeter, finally found it, by the catering exit, near the double doors where trays of shrimp skewers and lamb bites slipped in and out. The card read, "Vanessa." Of course, no one at my table acknowledged me. A teenage boy across from me was on his phone. A woman in a velvet dress dabbed her mouth delicately after every bite, never looking up. I slid into the chair. It rocked slightly, uneven footing. Before I could ask for water, a glass of red wine was placed in front of me. I hadn't touched alcohol in years. The autoimmune meds made sure of that. But I didn't make a fuss. Not tonight. I folded my hands in my lap. They think I'll embarrass them. That's always been the fear. The sound of silverware and polished glass clinking around me faded as my mind drifted backward. Clay was always the future. Even as a kid, he had the charm, the football trophies, the business internships, the polished speeches our father loved. I had books. I had questions. I had a quiet mind that no one took seriously. When Mom died, everything tipped. Dad married Clarice within the year. She smiled too wide, hugged too long, and slowly erased every piece of our home that had held Mom's scent, her paintings, her books. And then I wasn't invited to Aspen anymore. Christmas morning happened without me. Even when I dropped out of law school for 6 months to care for Grandma Irene, no one called to say thank you. No one asked when I went back. From the main table, someone clinked a glass for attention. A toast was beginning. I leaned slightly toward the woman beside me. "Lovely evening, huh?" She gave me a thin-lipped smile and turned away, whispering something to her husband. They both shifted in their seats. The back of my neck prickled. My stomach tightened. I felt off, not full, not nauseous. Just something was out of tune. I stood quietly, stepped into the hallway. Cool air from the nearby patio slipped through the open door, but it didn't ease the pressure in my chest. That's when I saw her. A woman in her mid-60s, short gray bob, dark blouse, standing near the shadowed end of the corridor. I didn't recognize her. She wasn't family. Wasn't anyone I'd ever seen at a reunion or wedding. She spoke in a voice so soft it was nearly a breath. "You don't know me," she said. "But your stepmother? She just touched your glass." I stared. She leaned in, thought no one was watching. Swap it. I saw her do something. You're not safe here. Then, as if she'd simply been waiting for that one line, she turned and disappeared through a side door, heels silent on the carpet. I didn't move for several seconds. My hand found the edge of the wall. Not safe here. I returned to the ballroom. Everything still looked perfect. My glass of wine still shimmered in the light. Without fanfare, I placed my hand over it. A waiter approached offering champagne. "Thank you," I said softly, taking two. I set one beside my place card, picked up the wine glass, and casually swapped them, leaving the original glass in the center of the tray. Clarice was watching. She hadn't touched her plate. She saw what I did. Her smile flickered. Her jaw shifted just slightly. It wasn't panic, but it wasn't confidence either. For the first time in years, she looked unsure. 15 minutes passed. Clay stood. His voice boomed through the mic, thanking Clarice, thanking their parents, their kids, their friends. People laughed, clapped, wiped their eyes. Then came the toast. Glasses rose. A cousin I didn't recognize, maybe one of the West Virginia ones, stood up 2 tables away. He swayed slightly, then his eyes rolled back and he collapsed, hard. Gasps erupted, chairs scraped, someone screamed, cutlery clattered to the floor. A woman called for help. Paramedics were summoned. Guests surged around the fallen man. And Clarice just stared. Her face was chalk. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. I didn't move. I stayed seated, because for once, I wasn't the one they were trying to erase. The air in the ballroom had shifted. You could almost feel the breath of every guest catching in their chest, all at once. Somewhere behind the clatter of dropped forks and crystal glasses, I heard Clay's voice, faint, stunned, call out, "Is someone calling an ambulance?" A medic rushed in with quiet urgency, the kind that only comes when they've seen this sort of thing before. Someone tried to lighten the mood with a joke over the mic, something awkward about maybe too much to celebrate tonight, but it didn't land. Nobody laughed. People were already whispering, but not about me. Clarice's face was pale now, not from panic but calculation. Her eyes flitted toward me, then darted away, like she wasn't sure if I'd caught something, or everything. I didn't give her the satisfaction of a reaction. I stood up quietly, smoothed the front of my blouse, and slipped out into the hallway, blending with the confusion. Outside the ballroom, the air was cooler. Still smelled like cigars and gardenias, but at least it wasn't stifling. I kept walking, past the powder room, past the little table with the anniversary guest book that nobody had signed yet. I was looking. I didn't know for what, until I realized I was searching for her, the woman who had warned me. Blue shawl, silver hair, calm voice, a face I couldn't quite place but couldn't shake either. I checked around the side patio. Nothing. Walked to the back exit, where the servers took smoke breaks. No one. I even stopped a young man in a black vest and asked, "Did you happen to see a woman come through here earlier? White hair, blue shawl, mid-60s maybe?" He blinked. "Sorry, ma'am, most guests didn't come out this way." Near the hallway that led to the restrooms, another woman, mid-40s, probably one of Clay's wife's friends, cut in front of me with a tight smile. "That area's for family," she said, not unkindly, just dismissively. I gave her a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Of course." Same tone I used the last time someone suggested I take the service elevator instead, but something in me was done playing that role tonight. I didn't turn back. I walked to the edge of the marble hallway and stood by the tall mirror, just out of sight from the main room, collecting my thoughts. It hit me then, not the woman in the shawl, not even the drink, but before, 3 years ago, the Christmas dinner at Dad's lake house. I'd barely made it through the appetizers before I broke into a cold sweat, hands shaking so bad I couldn't hold a fork. I remember the pressure in my chest, the nausea, the quiet judgment when I excused myself and curled up on the bathroom floor. Clarice hovering, telling everyone it must be an ulcer. "Too much stress," she had said sweetly. My father hadn't argued. Nobody had. They called an Uber, not an ambulance. I checked into urgent care alone. Now I wonder, Had that been the first time? Back then, I never questioned anything, especially not Clarice. I still believed that Dad marrying her had nothing to do with how quickly my mother's things vanished from the house. I believed that when people say, "she means well," they're not just making excuses for someone who knows exactly what they're doing. A voice pulled me back to the present. "Miss Velena?" I turned. A young server stood there, unsure. "Someone asked me to give you this." He extended a small folded napkin. It looked like nothing, but the handwriting was precise. "Your mother's sister was here tonight. Ask her what Clarice did in 1998. I stared at the note. My mother's sister. I didn't know I had one who was still alive. I had never met any family from Mom's side. Dad never spoke of them. Clarice sure as hell didn't, and she was here, watching me. Suddenly, this wasn't about a glass of wine, or being placed by the ice bucket, or even that sickening Christmas. This was bigger, longer, calculated. My stomach clenched, but not from fear this time, from something tighter, like the first turn of a key in a locked door. Clarice's voice drifted down the hall, sugar-laced and performative. "Must have been low blood sugar. Poor man hadn't eaten a thing before the champagne toast. We'll follow up and make sure he's okay." I walked back slowly, tucking the napkin into my clutch. She was standing with the MC now, one hand on his shoulder, the other gently fluttering as if waving away panic. Her tone was gentle, almost motherly. But every word was a thread she was pulling, to tie the story in a bow. She always controlled the narrative. That's how she held power in this family. Not with loud commands, but with the soft lies everyone was too polite to question. Clay stood beside her, silent, loyal. Of course he didn't ask questions. He never did. Not when she rerouted family funds from my mom's scholarship foundation to her charity gala. Not when she had me disinvited from their 4th of July weekends because there just wasn't room. I passed them both. Clarice's smile flickered when I approached. "Everything all right, dear?" she asked, still playing gracious hostess. I stopped, looked her in the eye, and said evenly, "Funny how sugar causes heart palpitations now." Her expression froze for a second. A crack. It was subtle, but I saw it. Then her lips curled back into a calm smile, like nothing had happened, like I hadn't just pressed my thumb to the seam of something she'd worked years to seal shut. I walked away without waiting for a response. In the pit of my chest, something shifted. Not quite anger, not yet rage. It was something colder. Clarity. I'd spent my whole life trying to be allowed in. Now, I wasn't going to waste the one thing she feared most. Leverage. The morning after the party, I sat at my kitchen counter, untouched coffee cooling beside me, still wearing the same t-shirt I'd pulled on when I got home. I hadn't slept. Not really. Maybe an hour, in between bursts of memory. Clarice's hand on my back, the clinking of glasses, the whisper from the woman in the blue shawl. The image of the paramedics kneeling next to a slumped man while the MC chuckled nervously about someone needing to pace themselves. They had the audacity to laugh. I opened my phone. Nothing from my father. Just a one-liner from Clay at 6:03 a.m. "Sorry about the scene, hope you're okay." Scene. Not incident. Not attempt. Not even what happened. Just a scene, like we'd all been extras in some badly scripted family farce. I stared at the message, then closed it without replying. Instead, I opened my email, dug deep, years back, looking for anything. A holiday card, a name I didn't recognize, an address that wasn't Clarice's friends or Dad's colleagues. But there was nothing. No trace of my mother's family, as if they'd been erased the day she died, like she never had siblings, cousins, a childhood. Just vanished. Until that note. "Your mother's sister was here tonight. Ask her what Clarice did in 1998. The handwriting had been careful, purposeful, not rushed. Someone had taken the time. That alone kept me awake. By noon, I was calling every contact I could find in a dusty old address book I hadn't touched since I moved to Austin, After 5 voicemails and one awkward call with a former neighbor of my grandparents, I got a number. She said she remembered my mother's older sister, Marla, moved back to Texas a while ago. She didn't have an address, but she remembered hearing Marla worked part-time at a historical society in Travis Heights. It was something. 2 hours later, I parked outside a small cafe tucked between a bookstore and a dog grooming shop. Quiet, shaded by an old pecan tree. The kind of place you'd miss if you weren't looking. I was early. My palms wouldn't stop sweating. I sat with my water, watching the door. Then she walked in. White gray hair pulled into a low twist, denim jacket over a sage green dress. Her movements were slow, deliberate, like she didn't want to draw attention. But when her eyes met mine, there it was. Recognition. She tilted her head, scanning me in silence. Her expression was calm, but something behind it was taking inventory. My nose, my cheekbones, the slope of my jaw. "You look like her," she said as she sat down across from me. Her voice was soft, warm, but low, like someone used to speaking in whispers. But softer. She was fire. My throat tightened. I hadn't heard anyone talk about my mom like that in years, not honestly. "She died when I was 10, I said. Nobody ever told me much after that. Marla gave a slow nod. That was by design. And then she began. "It started in late '97, she said. My mother had been sick for months by then. They thought it was chronic fatigue, then Lyme, then finally cancer. While she was going in and out of treatments, Clarice started showing up. She came to help with meals at first," Marla said, folding her napkin in half, then in half again. "Offered to run errands, sit with your mom, said it was just what friends do. But then, it got strange." I watched her closely. I didn't breathe. "They used your mother's sickness to build a future without her. I don't think your father ever planned to be alone. Not really. Clarice made herself indispensable, and the moment your mother passed, it was like Clarice had always been the one." I blinked hard. "No one told me that. No one ever even mentioned her before the wedding." "Because she erased everything she could." Marla reached into her bag, pulled out a thin manila envelope, and slid it across the table. "She started with us." I opened the flap. Inside was a photocopy of a letter. The paper was yellowing, but I could see the original. Blue ink, curling loops in the handwriting. It was dated June 18, 2002. "For Velena, on your 18th birthday." My hands trembled as I unfolded it. The words were unmistakably hers. Not just her pen, but her voice. Gentle but direct, careful but fierce. "My sweet girl, if you're reading this, I'm not with you anymore, and I'm sorry. Not for leaving, but for not being able to protect you from everything I feared. There are people who will wear my pearls but poison your cup. You'll know them by how they speak when no one's watching." I stopped reading. I had to. The tears had blurred everything. I stepped outside the cafe, away from the smell of coffee and the soft hum of voices, into the breeze that rustled through the trees overhead. It wasn't just paranoia. It wasn't just me being sensitive or dramatic like they always said. They knew. Clarice knew. They'd kept that letter from me. They let me believe I was forgotten, discarded. But my mother had tried. She had written. She had seen what might happen. She tried to leave me something solid, something real. I whispered it aloud because it was too big to hold inside. They knew who I could become, and that's why they tried to keep me small. When I walked back inside, Marla was still there. She didn't speak, just handed me a second envelope, this one thicker. "There's more," she said. "A trust, some filings." She tried to name me guardian if anything happened, but Gabriel and Clarice blocked it. "I kept copies. I wasn't sure if you'd ever come looking." I looked at her, a stranger, and yet somehow not. "I think I'm done staying small," I said quietly. Marla's eyes crinkled, like maybe, just maybe, she'd been waiting for me to say that for a long time. We agreed to meet again. She had more files to bring next time, and I promised I'd come with questions. But when I left that cafe, I didn't just carry papers and letters. I carried something no one in that house had ever given me, the truth. And I left that cafe knowing something Clarice never wanted me to learn. My mother hadn't left me behind. She'd been trying to reach me all along. I drove home in silence that evening, letting the sunset bleed across the windshield like ink in water. My phone buzzed twice, once from a group text about a birthday brunch I wasn't invited to, and once from Clay. Just a thumbs-up emoji. No words. I didn't reply. 3 days passed before I gathered the nerve to meet with Diane Roth, the attorney Marla had mentioned. A soft-spoken woman in her 60s, Diane's office sat on the 8th floor of a modest, brick-faced building off Congress Avenue. Her receptionist offered me water and a warm towel for my hands, like I was about to confess to something sacred. Diane didn't waste time with pleasantries. Her handshake was firm, and she smelled faintly of lavender and printer ink. As soon as I sat, she opened the thick envelope Marla had delivered the night before. "These are originals," she said, almost to herself. "Your aunts kept them in pristine condition. That alone speaks volumes." She pulled out papers one by one, laying them gently on her leather desk pad, a birth certificate, a notarized guardianship document, and then a slim, typewritten document with thick black borders. Her brows furrowed. This is a trust declaration," she murmured, adjusting her glasses. "Established in 1997. Your mother was the sole grantor." I leaned forward, heart thudding. She continued reading, slower now. "Provisions for educational expenses, medical care, and housing support, all earmarked for you. The principal was protected until you reached 21. Annual reporting was required." I barely breathed. "So what happened?" "That's the problem," she said, lips tightening. "It stopped. There's a record of activity up until 2006, then nothing. No disbursements, no annual reporting." "But why?" She pulled another sheet from the file. Her hand paused midair. This is an affidavit filed in 2007. It states you were legally unreachable. That's why the institution froze communication." I could feel the cold coming up through the soles of my shoes. "Who filed it?" She didn't look at me when she said it. "Clarice Hawthorne." I sank back into the chair. It wasn't even shock. It was a quiet recognition, like seeing an old scar under new light. "She always got the mail," I said aloud, more to myself. She used to say, "No sense having everyone's business flying around this house." I thought she was just strict. I remembered once, at 17, hearing her on the phone. I was walking past the den on my way to wash dinner plates. Her voice was sharp, but controlled. "She doesn't need money. What she needs is structure." At the time, I thought she was talking about my allowance, $40 a week, if I kept my room clean and didn't argue. Now, I understood. Diane's tone softened, but it didn't lose its edge. "We'll issue a formal inquiry to the financial institution, quietly. We don't want to tip anyone off until we confirm the timeline and identify all the signatories." "Can Clarice be charged?" I asked, not out of vengeance, but curiosity. "If there was manipulation or fraud, possibly," she said carefully. "But we'll need more than family drama. We'll need receipts." She tapped a yellow legal pad and began outlining the next steps. I watched her pen move and felt something settle in my chest. Not rage, exactly. Not grief either. Just clarity. An hour later, I was back in my car, parked outside my condo. The sun had dropped lower, casting shadows over my small lawn and the worn welcome mat I hadn't replaced in years. I sat there for a long time, staring at my front door. This place, modest and chipped at the edges, had been built entirely by me. Every cracked tile, every piece of secondhand furniture, every late-night freelance project I took to make ends meet, none of it came from that trust. None of it came from the family that buried me beneath their stories. I walked inside, set my keys down, and pulled out the letter from my mother again, the one Marla had handed me at the cafe. I unfolded the pages, smoothed the creases, and this time, I read it aloud. Her voice through my own mouth was strange, but familiar. The lines were written with care. She spoke of boundaries, of softness not being weakness, of strength not meaning silence, and one line struck deep. There are people who will wear my pearls but poison your cup. You'll know them by how they speak when no one's watching. I sat with that. Then I stood, walked to the kitchen, made a cup of tea, and opened my laptop. I typed slowly at first, then faster. To Clay Hawthorne. Subject, we should talk Clay. I'd like to talk. About the family, about Clarice, but mostly about the truth you never asked to know. I didn't hit send yet. I reread it twice. Not a trace of bitterness in it. No accusations, just precision. Then I clicked send. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel invisible. I didn't sleep much after the meeting with Diane. I stayed up in the kitchen, lights dim, my fingers tracing the edge of the folder she gave me, not because I doubted her, because I was scared of what came next, of who I'd have to look in the eye. At 6:42 a.m., I got the email from Clay. Okay, you want the truth? Come by my office, but come alone. No greeting, no sign-off, just like him. Short, cold, cautious. But there was something in that message that wasn't there before. A crack. I didn't respond right away. I showered, tied my hair back in a low knot, and dressed in gray slacks, a muted blouse, no jewelry, no makeup. If we were going to do this, it wasn't going to be a performance. I took the long way to his office, drove past the lake, let the morning air spill through the window as I rolled it down halfway. Austin was already warming up, sun glaring off glass buildings. The city felt like it was holding its breath. Clay's building downtown had a sharp, professional shine, newer than I remembered. I parked in the rooftop garage like he'd said, took the elevator to the 18th floor, and walked down the quiet hallway to his corner suite. The door was cracked open. I knocked once before pushing it wider. He stood by the window, hands in his pockets, suit jacket tossed across the back of his chair. His office was tasteful, expensive but not loud, framed degrees, family portraits, and one of those recycled air diffusers puffing something vaguely citrus. I glanced at the shelf. Birthday barbecues, lake trips, holiday dinners, every face but mine. He didn't sit, just turned slowly and said, "You always thought I got everything, but you never saw what they took from me to keep it." I didn't answer. I let the words land. He motioned to a leather chair across from his desk. I sat, not fully relaxed, just enough to show I wasn't here to spar, just to see. "I got a notice when I turned 25, he said, voice low. "Something about a trust in your name. Valina Marie Ellison." I froze, but stayed silent. I asked Clarice. She said it was nothing, just a technicality left over from Mom's will. Said you didn't finish school, so the trust was voided. His eyes met mine, but briefly. I believed her. "You didn't ask?" I said quietly. He swallowed. "I didn't want to." The pause between us wasn't empty, it was full of years. "Was it easier to think I just didn't belong?" I asked. "Yeah," he admitted. "It was." I let that sit for a second, then leaned forward. "Clay, when I ended up in the hospital after Christmas dinner, you never came. Why?" His face twitched. He looked toward the window as if the skyline could save him from the memory. "She said it was attention-seeking," he said slowly. "Said you staged it for sympathy, showed us pictures of pill bottles. They were Tylenol. I figured you were just being dramatic." I didn't flinch. "I was poisoned," I said evenly. That landed differently. His hands gripped the edge of his desk, tight. "You sure?" "Yes." He looked pale, not like he didn't believe me, like he suddenly believed too much. "She always managed everything," he said, almost to himself. "Mail, RSVPs, bank statements, said you didn't want to be found, said you'd run off and left us. God, she changed the locks before the funeral was even over." I didn't interrupt. He sat down slowly. "At the anniversary dinner, when you switched the glasses, I knew something was off. I saw her face change, but I just sat there." He looked ashamed. Really ashamed. "I didn't think she was dangerous. I thought she was overbearing, protective maybe." "She wasn't protecting," I said. "She was erasing." Clay didn't argue. He didn't even look up. I watched her cut people out like it was sport, he muttered. She said, "There's the family we build, and the ones who drag it down." I thought she meant addicts, unstable people. I didn't know she meant you. I stood. He looked up quickly. "Wait." I paused at the door. "If you need me to testify or whatever, just know I'm not proud of what I let happen." I turned around and met his eyes, finally without fear. "You don't need to be proud, Clay. Just be honest. That's the first thing I never got from this family." I left the office without a folder, without a file. But for the first time, my silence wasn't one of weakness. I walked down the concrete steps from Clay's building and out into the sting of wind that whipped between high-rises. No coat, no rush, just the same stride I used when I was 10 and learned to stop crying in public. 4 days passed without fanfare. I didn't wait by the phone. I didn't even check it much. But when Diane Roth finally called, her tone didn't need embellishing. "We've got movement," she said. No preamble, no soft landing. Just the sentence, sharp as a snapped bone. By the time I reached her office, it was past 10 a.m. The downtown buzz had dulled into a low humming background. Her assistant handed me a black coffee without asking. Diane stood at her glass wall, one hand on her hip, watching the traffic like it owed her answers. She turned slowly. "The trust wasn't expired, Valina." My fingers tightened around the coffee sleeve. "It was rerouted," she continued. "Over the span of 8 years. Quiet transfers. Mostly small, some large. All of it legal in appearance. But the end point?" She motioned me over. On her laptop, a spreadsheet, clean cold rows. One label glared from multiple entries, Heartline Educational Fund. "That's a non-profit," she nodded. "Registered as a 501c3, but the kicker is the signer on each transfer." Diane clicked a PDF. I leaned in. Clarice's name. Not as Branscombe, her married name, but as Clarice Merritt. I stared at the screen, feeling my throat go dry. The document didn't scream, it didn't accuse, but it sat there like a fingerprint on a loaded weapon. "She used her maiden identity," I said. Diane clicked again. "Heartline isn't just a name on paper. It has a building, a board, a mission statement about scholarships for underserved youth." I let out a slow breath. Was any of it real? "I don't know," Diane said, "but I know someone who can find out." That afternoon I met Reese Monroe, Diane's forensic accountant, in a modest firm above a law office. He wore a faded flannel shirt beneath a blazer and spoke with a cadence that made you lean in. Not flashy, just thorough. He walked me through the paper trail. "Your trust was structured to trigger partial disbursements when you turned 21, 25, and 30, but by your 25th birthday, all funds had already been redirected. How?" "Via a secondary entity, A. Merit Foundation, an umbrella shell. It served as a funnel into Heartline." "And Clarice?" "She was the primary administrator. She signed off using internal family codes tied to estate documents." Reese paused. "Most wouldn't catch it unless they were looking." I studied the man's tired eyes. "So you're telling me my education, my future, the life I could have had, was legally stolen?" He didn't flinch. "Misappropriated. That's the word the IRS would use. Fraud is what we can build if we prove intent." Diane handed me a draft motion to freeze Heartline's assets. "We need to act quickly before she catches wind." I scanned the document. Legal terms, numbered clauses. It looked clinical, but each word felt like a stitch in a wound I hadn't even realized was still bleeding. "She didn't just take money," I said softly. "She took years I can't get back." Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. Later that evening, I returned to my apartment. The sun had long since slipped behind the skyline. I set my keys on the kitchen counter, lit the stove, and let the kettle sing. I didn't move fast, didn't need to. The heat I'd felt days ago was gone, burned out, leaving behind something steadier, something colder. I poured tea into a chipped mug, sat at the dining table, then pulled out my old laptop, the one I hadn't opened since before my internship in Chicago. It took a few tries, but I finally logged in to my ancient email. The inbox was mostly dust. Promotions, old subscription confirmations, forgotten threads. But one folder marked blocked caught my eye. 3 emails, all from Marla Wren 97. The timestamp on each, the morning of my 18th birthday. I opened the first one. Subject, just one day, can you come home? Message, I know what they told you, but I didn't agree. I never wanted it to go this way. Please call, please, I miss you. I opened the second. Subject, you deserve the truth. Message, they've locked everything down, even your mail is rerouted. I tried to send something but it got bounced. I'm scared for you, Valina. And the third. Subject, I'm sorry. Message, if you read this, just know. It was never about you not being good enough. It was about making sure you didn't ask questions. I sat still, heart beating too slowly. Clarice had set up parental controls on my phone the week before that birthday, said it was for my own safety. My school laptop had filters I couldn't override. She said it was to protect me from the internet. She wasn't protecting me. She was fencing me in. I closed the lid, and then I opened a new tab. I didn't hesitate on the 2-line. For Clarice. No more silence. I know what you did. I know what was mine. I'm not here to make peace. I'm here to make record. I read it twice, then a third time. My finger hovered over send and stopped. Not yet. Let her sleep well. Let her think the storm passed. Let her post her charity photos. Let her keep collecting applause. Because the next time we saw each other, it wouldn't be at a brunch table or a hallway full of polite smiles. And I wouldn't be the one swallowing anything. The next time I saw Clarice, it would be on my terms, and with the law standing behind me. The morning after I drafted that email, I didn't send it. Instead, I went for a long walk. No phone, no earbuds, no destination. Just my shoes crunching over old leaves on the walking trail near the bluff. The wind was cool, not cold, but steady enough to remind me I was still standing. That night I returned home, opened the laptop, and saw the message. It had been waiting for over an hour on my business page. I clicked it, expecting another vague offer or polite sympathy note, but this one began with a sentence that made my hands still over the keyboard. You don't know me. I was a waitress at your brother's anniversary party. I saw something. I thought you should have this. Below it, a photo. Not perfect. Blurry. Slightly tilted. Likely taken quickly and discreetly, but clear enough. Clarice leaning in, her lips near a server's ear, one finger extended, pointing not at the table but toward where I remembered sitting that night. I clicked on the image, zoomed in, checked the timestamp, 9:04 p.m. That was nearly 20 minutes after I arrived and took my seat. She had told Diane she never even saw me that night. And yet, here she was, inches from a server, whispering something, finger raised in my direction. I felt my breath catch, but not out of shock. It was something colder, steadier, like a quiet click in the back of my mind, locking something into place. I sat there for maybe 2 full minutes, then forwarded the image to Diane and Reese, no caption needed. 10 seconds later, Diane replied, "It's time." 3 days later, I sat in the back row of the HOA community meeting room, hands folded neatly in my lap. I wore a navy blouse, slacks, no jewelry except my wedding band. Clarice had always said, subtlety is power. I wondered if she'd feel the same today. She was at the head of the room, smiling like nothing was wrong, her voice smooth, rehearsed. Transparency, as you know, has always been one of the pillars of Heartline. We strive to maintain clear records of every donation, every scholarship decision, and our financial process. I tuned her out. My eyes skimmed the room. Roughly 25 people. Retirees, young couples, a single mom I'd seen jogging the neighborhood trail. All here for their dues or complaints or curiosity. But today, they'd leave with something else. A door at the back creaked open. Diane stepped inside, wearing a charcoal blazer, calm as ever. Beside her, Reese Monroe carried a laptop and a slim hardcase folder. They didn't stop, just walked straight to the front. Clarice paused. "Excuse me, do you have a question?" Diane didn't answer. She turned to the room. "I apologize for the interruption, but I have legal authority to make the following announcement. People shifted, the air changed. We are placing a temporary freeze on all accounts and assets associated with the Heartline Educational Fund," Diane said clearly, "as well as affiliated foundations tied to Mrs. Clarice Merritt, pending investigation into possible financial misconduct." Someone near the window whispered, "Wait, what?" Clarice stepped forward. "This is outrageous. These are family lies. They're just trying to smear me." But Reese was already projecting documents onto the screen. Transfer logs, account routes, screenshots tracing funds from a Roth family trust to a foundation, one bearing Clarice's maiden name. The room fell into a low hum of disbelief. Clarice's voice sharpened. "Those records are misinterpreted. I had full discretionary rights. I was protecting the family." A woman stood up. Board member. Gray bob. Hands trembling slightly. "My nephew applied for a scholarship last year. He was denied. Told the funds were low. Is that because they were being rerouted?" Another voice. Male. "Did you use donation money to silence your stepdaughter?" Clarice opened her mouth, then closed it. For a moment, I thought she might fight. Argue. Pretend. But she didn't. She looked at me. Not with her usual smirk or that composed chill she used like perfume. This time, her eyes held something else. Recognition. That she'd lost the room. She picked up her folder and walked out. No goodbye, no rebuttal, just the sound of her heels, retreating. I didn't follow. I didn't need to. After the meeting adjourned, I stepped out into the parking lot alone. The sun had dipped behind the trees. Crickets had started. The hum of a distant lawnmower echoed from a few blocks away. I leaned on the railing and let out a breath I'd been holding for far too long. I didn't cry, not because I wasn't hurt, but because I finally understood. This wasn't revenge. This was restoration. My phone buzzed in my bag. It was Clay. I played the voicemail as I sat in the driver's seat, engine still off. "She's calling in favors," he said. "You need to be ready." I stared out the windshield. The porch lights of nearby homes were blinking on one by one, and I was ready, but not for what came next. Clay's warning still echoed in my ears 2 days later as I parked outside the county hospital's records office. I had told myself I was ready. Ready to confront, to uncover, to finish what Clarice had started when she decided I was disposable. But as I stepped out of the car and the wind whipped across my jacket, I realized being ready didn't mean being numb. The lobby was quiet that morning, clean linoleum floors, walls the color of dull oatmeal, the faint smell of antiseptic, sterile and cold, like the night everything had changed. Diane had called me at 7 a.m. sharp. "We've got it," she'd said, her voice clipped. "The ER file from that night. You should see it with your own eyes." So I did. A young receptionist led me to a small room with a narrow table and 2 chairs. A file folder sat waiting, my name printed across the top. I opened it with hands steady enough to fool most people, but not myself. There it was. In black ink, "Foreign substance ingestion suspected." Just below that, a box labeled "Further Toxicology" had been left unchecked. No test, no follow-up. Next to it, a note, handwritten and signed. "Family assured no foul play." And beneath that, Dr. Peter Merritt, Clarice's husband. My fingers gripped the edges of the paper. So that's how it had happened. He had been on shift. He saw me wheeled in, barely conscious, and instead of sounding alarms, he muted them. He turned a medical red flag into a family misunderstanding. And just like that, what should have triggered a full investigation became a whisper. A file quietly closed. Diane leaned against the doorway. "He didn't just fail you, Valina. He covered for her." I didn't respond. I just stared at the signature, wondering how long he'd been part of it, how long he'd looked me in the eye at holidays, said, "Merry Christmas," passed me a plate of sweet potatoes, and known. I folded the papers back into the folder and stood. "I need to see them," I said. The drive to Clarice's wasn't long, just long enough to rehearse what I wouldn't say. I wouldn't yell. I wouldn't cry. I wouldn't beg for understanding from people who'd proven they had none. When I arrived, I didn't bother with the gate. I walked around the side, through the shrubs she used to brag about planting herself. I found Peter in the garden, kneeling in the dirt, clipping something red and blooming. He looked up. He didn't speak. Neither did I, at first. I held out the folder and let him take it. He flipped it open. Read. His eyes moved too quickly to be casual. Then they stopped. His shoulders sagged slightly. "She said you were spiraling," he said after a long pause. "That you needed help. That you were unstable." "She said," I repeated. "And you? What did you say, Peter? What did you do when a patient came in poisoned and couldn't speak for herself?" He looked down at the roses. "You were coming apart, Valina. You were angry. She didn't want to lose you, but she was fine letting me nearly die?" I cut in, voice steady. "Letting my credibility be written off with a single phrase? Voluntary overdose for attention. That was your diagnosis." He didn't deny it. That silence told me more than any confession could. The sliding glass door creaked open behind us. Clarice. She stepped onto the patio in her signature navy silk and pearls, like she was hosting a tea party and not facing the ruin of a reputation. "If you came for an apology," she said dryly, "it's too late. I protected this family. You were the threat." "No," I said slowly. "I was the mirror. You just couldn't stand the reflection." Her jaw clenched. I saw the twitch. "I watched you rewrite history in front of people who didn't know better. I watched you use a non-profit meant for underprivileged girls to line your own pocket and bury me in the process." Clarice crossed her arms. "You think this little crusade makes you righteous? This is jealousy, nothing more." I stepped forward. Not too close, but enough that she couldn't pretend I was just a voice in the wind. "A court order was signed yesterday," I told her. "Heartline's assets are frozen. Your name's under audit for fraud. And Peter..." I turned toward him. "You might want to start talking to a lawyer about medical ethics violations." Clarice's lips parted, but her voice cracked before the words could come out. "You're bluffing," she hissed. "I don't bluff," I said calmly. "That's your game. Mine is documentation, evidence, signed statements. I don't need smoke and mirrors. I have receipts." Clarice looked toward Peter, but he wasn't meeting her eyes anymore. He just stood there, a man who'd spent too long trying to protect the wrong person. "You'll regret this," she said finally, low and sharp, but her voice was thinner than I'd ever heard it. "No," I said, turning to go. "I regret not doing it sooner." I was halfway to the gate when she called after me. "You'll always be the outsider, Valina. You don't belong. You never did." I stopped, slowly turned. "No," I said. "I'm the one who stopped pretending blood makes a family. That's the difference." And I didn't look back, not even once. The gravel crunched beneath my tires as I pulled up to the house. My house, now. I turned off the ignition, letting the engine tick into silence while the wind rustled the seagrass behind the property. For a moment, I didn't move. I just sat there, watching the white shutters sway slightly on their hinges, the ones Clarice never bothered to repair. The place looked smaller than I remembered, or maybe I'd just outgrown it. 1 week had passed since I'd walked away from Clarice's patio without glancing back. Since then, the paperwork moved fast. Diane had called me that morning with 5 words I hadn't dared let myself hope for. "It's done. You're the heir." The misappropriation was confirmed. Clarice's name was erased from the trust. The estate was mine, not stolen, not gifted, not negotiated, but returned. I didn't celebrate. I just nodded into the phone and thanked Diane for moving faster than I ever thought the legal system could. Now I stepped out of the car and walked toward the front door with a set of new keys and a heart that felt heavier than the house itself. The door creaked open. No alarms, no shouts. Just air, cool, stale, untouched. I walked through the foyer slowly, like I was intruding in a museum. The tile still bore the scuff mark from when I slipped that Thanksgiving. No one had helped me up then either. The kitchen light was off, but I didn't bother flipping the switch. Daylight filtered in, washing over the empty table that once held forced laughter and name cards. Mine had always been mismatched. Valina, 1 year. V. Roth the next. Subtle jabs hidden under the pretense of just a mistake. But I remembered every one. I moved to the living room. Dust lined the edges of the fireplace mantel. That's where I found it, propped up against a forgotten candle, a silver nameplate. Valina Grace Roth, the one Clarice used to hide whenever guests came over. I picked it up, felt the weight in my palm. It was heavier than it looked, like most truths. Beside it sat a photo of my mother. Her smile was tight, almost hesitant, taken long before her illness, long before the family began pulling her in opposite directions like a rope in a game none of us volunteered for. I stared at her eyes. There was still something there. Maybe guilt is what stopped Clarice from throwing it out. Or maybe she thought no one would notice it still stood. But I did. I moved to the side drawer and pulled it open. The familiar scent of lavender and cedar hit me. My mother's scent. There, folded neatly, was the gray scarf my father gave me the night of the holiday party. The one I'd left behind in the chaos. It was still here, still mine. I took it with me. The path behind the house led to the bench that faced the water. It had been there for decades, weather-worn, solid, unmoved by storms. I brushed off some sand and sat, laying the scarf across my lap. The ocean stretched ahead in silence. I didn't cry. I didn't say a word. I just watched the tide move in its rhythm, unbothered, unhurried. They gave me silence, and now I claimed it. The wind picked up slightly, tugging at the ends of the scarf. I pulled it tighter, not for warmth, but for grounding. My phone buzzed once in my pocket. I checked it. It was Clay. They're trying to save face. Public statement pending. Something about a tragic misunderstanding. I stared at the message for a moment, then typed back, "Let them. I'm not showing up for their performance anymore." I placed the phone back into my coat and leaned back. I didn't need applause. I didn't need acknowledgement. Not from people who saw love as leverage. I sat there for maybe an hour, just breathing, letting go. When the tide rose halfway up the shore, I stood. I draped the gray scarf around my shoulders, not as armor, not as memory, just as mine. On the walk back to the house, the air shifted, brisker, still. I stepped through the door one last time, ran my fingers along the banister, then locked the place behind me, not out of spite, out of peace. Back in the car, I didn't blast music. I didn't call anyone. I just drove, windows cracked, sky beginning to dim. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I owed anyone an explanation. Maybe I had been cold, or maybe I was finally clear. Do you think I was too cold, or finally clear?